Happiness never followed, even though in 1967 they sold more albums than the Beatles. After leaving, one member fell into alcoholism and ended up sleeping on a mat at a budget boarding home. His image imprisoned another, ruining his relationships and mental well-being. Achievement turned into a jail. 3 members perished in 9 years, one from a rare malignancy, one from an unexpected heart attack, and the third only a few weeks following their final tour. There's just one left to share their heartbreaking Monkees story. It all began with a straightforward concept. No one appeared interested in the TV program about a failing band that Bob Rafelson had long wanted to do. Then everything changed in 1964. After the worldwide success of the Beatles film A Hard Day's Night, Rafelson's concept became less absurd. He revised the idea with his colleague Bert Schneider. Their goal was to bring the Beatlemania excitement to America. However, the Beatles weren't the only source of inspiration for television. It was designed to reflect them. It was difficult to convince NBC to support the show. The initial pilot's tests were appalling. The audience didn't understand. It appeared to be a rough show. The performers dressed themselves. Additionally, Mickey Braddock, his previous stage name, was used to credit Dolenz. The majority of executives wanted to abandon the entire project. However, Rafelson remained persistent, took a big chance. In order to highlight the performers' true selves rather than simply their personas, he re-edited the pilot and included snippets from their auditions. This audacious action was successful. Tests of the updated version were really positive. 2 complete seasons were promptly ordered by NBC. What began as an insane do-it-yourself project quickly developed into a full-fledged TV program that won Emmy Awards and revolutionized television. However, the Monkees were more than simply a show. It was a business machine behind the scenes. Columbia Pictures was well aware of their actions. The purpose of the television program was more than merely amusement. Records, posters, toys, lunchboxes, and even Davy Jones dolls were sold there. Columbia executive Jackie Cooper freely acknowledged it. The Monkees sold more albums in 1967 than both the Rolling Stones and the Beatles put together. Their debut album remained at the top of the charts for 13 weeks in a row and was scarcely off the charts for more than a year. Store shelves were stocked with their trading cards, board games, and wool hats. The Monkees were an empire, not simply a band. It was equally crazy how they discovered the Monkees. An advertisement appeared in The Hollywood Reporter and Daily Variety in September 1965. It shouted auditions lunacy. 4 crazy lads were what they were searching for, 17 to 21 years old. They were looking for musicians, but they were also looking for enthusiasm. The sort you get at a coffee shop like Ben Frank's in Hollywood. There were hundreds, approximately 437 aspirants lined up, hoping to become TV celebrities. Even several well-known people tried out. Due of his receding hair and poor teeth, Stephen Stills was rejected from his audition. Paul Williams, who would go on to write some of the greatest songs, also failed. Nilsson Harry and Three Dog Night's Danny Hutton also made an attempt. Rafelson and Schneider would tease the candidates during the audition process to gauge their reactions. Michael Nesmith arrived with a wash bag because he was worried that if he left it outside, someone would take it. When they yanked Peter Tork's chair out from beneath him, he retaliated. They were able to land the parts because to their rapid, unconventional reactions. And no, Charles Manson did not try out. In spite of the stories. The last 4, they couldn't be more different. As a Broadway star who had previously been on the Ed Sullivan program with the Beatles, Davy Jones was already well known. Before the Monkees were merely a concept, he had already signed a contract with Columbia. Due to a childhood illness that weakened his hip, Mickey Dolenz, a kid star on the program Circus Boy, had to modify his drumming. Only Michael Nesmith saw the initial advertisement and responded. Liquid paper was created by his mother. Thus he didn't actually require the funds. And the oldest, Peter Tork, was from the folk movement in Greenwich Village, and only attended because his buddy Stephen Stills recommended it after being turned down himself. Critics have referred to them as bogus. Some claimed that the Monkees weren't deserving of their notoriety, yet they weren't only actors. They turned into a legitimate band that changed television, sold millions of records, and spawned a brand new pop cultural phenomenon. What began as an insane experiment ultimately shaped TV, music, and the entire concept of what it meant to be a teenage idol. Don Kirshner created a system that was only focused on creating successful albums when he was brought on board to manage the music for the Monkees television program. Whether the band could play instruments was irrelevant to him. He didn't trust the 4 young men chosen for the program to provide the results he desired. He brought in the Wrecking Crew instead, a band of top studio musicians who had contributed to many successes. The only instruction given to the Monkees was to sing. Lewis Shelton, the guitarist who composed the well-known opening to Last Train to Clarksville, contributed to more Monkees songs than any other session musician. Kirshner said it like it was. He claimed to have music to supply and a TV show to operate, and it's okay if that means disbanding the band. His recording sessions were even shifted from California to New York. The Monkees should be kept far away from the action. At first the formula worked. Within a month 4.5 million copies of their debut record were sold. However, the band was becoming enraged behind the scenes. Both Peter Tork and Michael Nesmith have actual musical experience. They were more than simply rock stars posing as actors. They had paid their dues, played at the clubs, and lived the life. It was embarrassing to watch other people sit on the sidelines and record the music. Nesmith's rage was evident. He told Rolling Stone that copying other people's work rather than creating original stuff was soul-crushing. He felt that, like the Beatles, the Monkees had an obligation to give their audience something genuine. Nesmith was prepared to fight, but Mickey Dolenz was quietly complaining to his pals. He persisted in pressuring Kirshner to allow them to record their own music, and some of his compositions were approved, but he was still powerless. The situation worsened when Kirshner secretly published their second album, More of the Monkees. The cover featured a corny JC. The liner notes strangely complimented Kirshner personally for the penny picture shoot. Not even advance copies were given to the band. Like everyone else, they had to go out and purchase the record. Soon later, the breaking point was reached. Nesmith ultimately lost it one day during a Beverly Hills meeting. He punched a hole through the wall in rage at being disregarded, then turned to Kirshner and warned him that it may have been his face. Everyone in the room was aware of the shift. A tenuous deal that had been worked up to give the band greater influence had been ruined a few weeks prior when Kirshner had covertly released a single in Canada without the band's consent. The trust was lost, despite the single being removed. The hole in the wall at that precise instant came to represent all that the Monkees had been battling: the illusion of becoming puppets, the lack of control, and the phony image. Soon after, Kirshner lost his job. Kirshner wasn't replaced by the Monkees, despite the show's producers realizing they were too well liked. The band was at last free. Now that he was gone, they started working on their own terms, dumping the remaining tracks he had requested. For weeks, they were confined to RCA Studio C, where they lived, breathed, and recorded the future headquarters. The studio was where they slept. They became stuck. They quarreled. They rejoiced. Wild, messy, and full of life. Mickey Dolenz subsequently said, "It had everything that the previous albums had not. They used their own instruments this time. They composed their own music." The record went double platinum and rocketed to the top of the charts. The Monkees were heard for the first time in the way they had always intended. Ironically, Kirshner discovered the Archies, his ideal band, after being expelled. Since they weren't genuine, they never responded. Being a Monkee was not simple. Even after gaining creative control, the TV show's filming was very taxing. The show, which was sometimes created just to sell more records, was broken up into short scenes and bursts of filming rather than lengthy takes like other sitcoms. The band was being forced to the limit by the demands of recording, touring, and filming. When Columbia sent them on a full tour, things became worse. The producers initially opposed it. The Monkees proved their doubts about the band's ability to perform live. Following the success of their initial performance in Hawaii, they quickly faced an even greater number of demands. Day after day, week after week, they continued to perform, record, and film until the enthusiasm that had brought them fame began to wane. You could observe the changes once the TV show's second season premiered. The events were weirder, they wore new outfits, and their hair was longer. The band was given more freedom to improvise by the producers, and occasionally whole sequences were created on the moment. A few of the episodes were successful. Others thought the group was merely phoning it in, torn between artistic aspirations and business responsibilities. Both the ambition and the sloppiness were noted by critics. Quick cuts, strange jumpy edits, and plots that didn't always make sense were some of the techniques the program began stealing from European art cinema. At points it seemed less like a children's comedy and more like a bizarre dream. However, underneath the madness was a genuine struggle between the Monkees' identities and aspirations. The main argument Davy Jones had wasn't with record execs or producers, it had to do with the role he had been made to play. On the program, he was more than simply an actor. He had a cost because he was Davy. He was the perpetually youthful idol and the adorable heartthrob in public. It wore him down in private. In England, Davy had begun his career as a well-known theatre performer. He was a Broadway star. He had even shared the stage with the Beatles on the same evening on the Ed Sullivan program. Now, however, none of that mattered. People expected him to be Davy wherever he went, charming, smiling, and ideal. Later on, he acknowledged that the pressure pushed him over the brink, impacting his mental health, his children, and his marriages. Davy was already being regarded as yesterday's news by his late 20s, and the scars he carried with him for the rest of his life were severe. It wasn't simply the end of a life when he died in 2012. It marked the end of a chapter that had once had a lot of promise. The path taken by Peter Tork wasn't much simpler. He possessed a genuine musician's spirit when he joined the Monkees. He desired for the group to remain a band. However, he felt utterly alone most of the time. Although he later claimed to have more faith in the group's concept than anybody else, it appeared that no one else had the same vision. Tork was exhausted from the recording procedure, and he felt as though he was losing a genuine chance while others made jokes about beating tambourines all day. He resorted to narcotics in order to cope. Later on, he came clean about it, acknowledging that he was the first Monkee to become stoned and that they all soon followed him. The drive to try everything evolved from what began with marijuana, anything that could make the agony go away, like flower power, crazy parties, or fast vehicles. Alcohol, however, was shown to be the most hazardous. After years of heavy drinking, Peter eventually sobered up in the 1980s. His effort demonstrated the extent of the wounds from those years of being a wild yet profoundly perplexing monkey. No one anticipated what would happen when the Monkees released their debut album on October 10, 1966. Not only did their self-titled debut create a stir, it was a huge success. It rose up the Billboard 200 chart and held the top spot for 13 weeks in a row. It was unprecedented for a new band. After the arrival of the Monkees, even the Beatles, who had just released their much-lauded album, were unable to maintain their top slot. It wasn't limited to America either. It got Monkee Mania. The next year, the album was also at the top of the UK charts. Critics were unsure on how to interpret it. The Monkees were perceived by many as a contrived ensemble that was made more for television than for actual music. Fans, however, didn't care about any of that. The album was certified quintuple platinum and sold over 5 million copies. Furthermore, it wasn't a one-time achievement. The Monkees would later record 4 consecutive #1 albums, something that even the largest rock bands found difficult to do. One song in particular grabbed the globe by storm, even though the album dominated the charts. Written by a youthful Neil Diamond and performed by Mickey Dolenz, I'm a Believer peaked at #1 in America in the end of 1966 and remained at the top for 7 weeks in a row. It was a huge hit at the end of the year and continued to gain popularity into 1967 when it became the year's best-selling song. In the US, UK, Australia, Canada, Ireland, and New Zealand, the song was playing wherever you looked. Critics also praised it. Cashbox commended its infectious sound and harmonies, while Billboard described it as a dance mover with immediate effect. It continued to be a major force in pop culture years later, gaining a spot on Rolling Stone's list of the best songs ever written. The Monkees recorded it, but Neil Diamond subsequently recorded his own version. That was the one that everyone recalled. A crazy rumor that the Monkees sold more albums in 1967 than the Beatles and Rolling Stones combined began to circulate as their celebrity soared. It sounded unreal. That's because it was, in a sense, in a 1977 interview, one of the Monkees, Mike Nesmith, eventually acknowledged that he had made it up. He chose to have a little fun and said he didn't trust reporters. However, the narrative took on a life of its own when it was published. Years later, it was even reprinted as truth by big journals like Rolling Stone. However, whether they were real or not, the Monkees' success was demonstrated without the need for any grandiose stories. In just 2.5 years, they sold millions of records worldwide, controlled the charts for almost 6 months, and had 4 #1 albums in a single year. The Monkees left a legacy that was unusually authentic for a band that some people didn't even believe existed. Everyone at NBC, including the Monkees, believed the show had lost its appeal by the beginning of 1968. It had been a major smash initially, garnering high ratings and helping the band sell 35 million albums, even more than the Beatles and Rolling Stones took together. However, the charm was waning, and the episodes began to seem the same. After only 2 seasons, NBC made the decision to terminate it. Mickey Dolenz's farewell program ridiculed the television industry as a whole. As a critique of the business, it even featured a spooky evil eye that mesmerized onlookers. In what amounted to a farewell letter, folk musician Tim Buckley ended the performance with the eerie song "To the Siren." The Monkees had ambitious plans to alter everything if the program had been renewed. Only live performances and music, no more comedies. However, they never had the opportunity. The band faded from the American public eye following the cancellation. According to Peter Tork, the Monkees attempted to redefine themselves with the film Head after the TV series concluded. It was their audacious attempt to escape their fabricated persona. However, the scheme backfired on them. Head only made $16,000 at the box office, despite costing $750,000 to film, a catastrophe by any standard. During crazy drug-fueled meetings with filmmaker Bob Ruffleson, Jack Nicholson contributed to its writing. The film made no attempt to conceal its message. The phony band is metaphorically killed in the first scene as Mickey Dolenz leaps off a bridge. They later sang songs like "You Say We're Manufactured, We All Agree on That," desired to communicate to the world that they were more than a simple commodity. Their adolescent followers, however, didn't get it. Additionally, the grown-ups they tried to impress avoided them. The movie's advertisements were odd as well. The word "head" slowly appears on a man's forehead. Critics detested it. It was only worth watching if you were high, according to one New York Times review. Their reputation was severely damaged, and any future film intentions were shattered by the film's failure. The audio was hardly affected at all, falling well short of their previous smashes, reaching at just number 45. Things were collapsing behind the scenes. Peter Tork made the decision that he could no longer stand it in December 1968. He paid $150,000 a year, a substantial sum at the time, to buy out the final 4 years of his contract. 2 years prior, Tork had genuinely considered leaving, but he was persuaded to stay. "I didn't care about the fame or the awards," he subsequently stated. "All he wanted to do was perform authentic music." He became much more irritated while recording sessions. He claimed that while the others labored for hours to acquire the proper takes, Davy Jones would do his tambourine portions swiftly. Davy grew weary. Mickey became insecure. Mike desired complete authority over his own compositions. While everyone else had psychologically checked out, Tork felt alone and continued to believe in the band. The band presented Tork with a gold watch that said, "From the guys down at work," during the taping of a TV special. Though intended as a jest, it signaled the end of a period. After years of attempting to get over his past as the guy from the Monkees, Tork eventually found peace with it and moved on to start his own band. The gang continued to dwindle. Following Tork's departure, Davy Jones, Mickey Dolenz, and Mike Nesmith made an effort to keep things going. Each would have their own side on the double album they planned. Ultimately, they were only able to release one album, The Monkees Present. The unraveling went on. Mike Nesmith resigned in 1970 as well, frustrated by the lack of authority. Only Davy and Mickey remained. They made a last album titled Changes since they were committed to completing their obligations. However, the Monkees' time was obviously over. The last time they recorded was in September 1970. Their last single was a complete failure. The Monkees' name was entirely omitted when it was distributed under the incorrect names of Mickey Dolenz and Davy Jones. It seemed to be the last blow. Later on, Davy acknowledged that he had lost any sense of his desires. He made an effort to keep the band together half the time. The other half simply wanted to flee and go to sleep. Davy Jones believed he could transition into a solo career with ease after the Monkees broke up in 1970. He was still well known and a heartthrob. But being famous may be challenging. When Bell Records signed him in 1971, they restrained him rather than granting him freedom. He was not even allowed to choose his own music. It produced dull, unmemorable records that failed to resonate with listeners. Rainy Jane peaked at a dismal number 52 on his second solo album Davy Jones, which hardly made an impression. It was insufficient even when he sang the song Girl on the Brady Bunch, which would subsequently become a favorite among fans. The album didn't even contain it. Glenn A. Baker, a music historian, said it best in retrospect. Jones was so talented and self-assured that his difficulties were just perplexing. Despite his vocal aspirations to go solo, he appeared bewildered when he was the only one in the spotlight. Davy continued to try though. He performed for children, put out little albums from time to time, and was named the greatest adolescent idol of all time by Yahoo Music in 2008. Even when the world changed, his appeal remained constant. Peter's life took a turn for the worst after the Monkees. Drinking first seemed enjoyable and even liberating. Nevertheless, alcohol quickly took a firm hold on him. Peter acknowledged that he would never have dared to perform some things when intoxicated. But you can't pick and choose while you're drunk. It continued to press till it almost killed him. Hollywood was also unkind. Torque was locked out as he had no new hits or a machine to support him. Headshots in hand, he hammered the pavement. However, he only received one reading after a year of trying, and he blew it. He ended up sleeping on a mat next to his little daughter at a $25 per month boarding home, destitute and broken. It was not until 1980 for him to ultimately struggle his way out of it and achieve sobriety by what he referred to as a spiritual surrender. He recovered with the aid of Eastern philosophy and a stronger bond with life. Later, he performed once again with the band Shoe Suede Blues, but he was still put to the test by fate. He received a rare, severe cancer diagnosis in 2009. For the rest of his life, it would loom large. As always, the odd one out, Michael Nesmith chose a different path, the wool hat-wearing thinker. He jumped headfirst into the nascent genre of country rock. He started the first national band immediately after quitting the Monkees. They produced 3 albums in quick succession: Nevada Fighter, Loose Salute, and Magnetic South. Each record featured lush melodies and shimmering steel guitars that would subtly sway industry titans like Graham Parsons and the Eagles. However, hardly nobody paid attention at the time. Like a secret that only a select few were aware of, Nesmith's music was hailed yet disregarded. He continued to innovate, nevertheless. He came across the concept that would eventually become MTV in 1976 while creating a short clip for his song Rio. Before anybody else fully understood the value of music videos, he even developed a show called Pop Clips, which he sold to Warner Amex. Nesmith was not burdened by financial concerns as his comrades were. That cushion, along with his mother's invention of liquid paper, allowed him to prioritize his work over popularity. Even legends may be touched, but he never truly looked back. The Monkees lost 3 of their own in a cruel 9-year period. On February 29, 2012, Davy Jones, who was still active and traveling, passed away from an unexpected heart attack. He was just 66. It was like a blow to the supporters. He was arranging performances one day, and then he vanished. For 10 arduous years, Peter Tork battled one of the world's rarest malignancies. A torturous, protracted conflict that concluded on February 21, 2019. He was 77. Then Michael Nesmith also died, not quite 3 years later. Finally, on December 10, 2021, his heart failed. He completed the Monkees' farewell tour with Mickey Dolenz a few weeks prior, the final man standing. Nesmith passed away quietly at home with his loved ones at his side. The band that began as a 1966 made-for-TV joke abruptly ended the last chapter of their life narrative. Even though the Monkees were created on a soundstage, their influence was as genuine as it could be because of all of their hardships, hopes, setbacks, and minor triumphs. Looking at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you wouldn't realize the Monkees were one of the biggest bands of the 1960s. They have sold over 21 million records in the US alone, had 4 #1 albums, 3 #1 singles, including I'm a Believer and Daydream Believer, yet still haven't been honored. Fans have been irritated by this omission for decades. There are petitions underway. There have been heated discussions. And some people think the true cause is personal. In 2007, Monkees member Peter Tork publicly said as much. He accused Jan Wenner, the editor of Rolling Stone magazine, of using his veto authority to prevent them from being included. Because the Monkees began as a television band, critics have frequently claimed that they were not true musicians. However, when you look at the stats, that claim quickly becomes unfounded. Bands like The Animals, The Rascals, and even Black Sabbath, who are already in the Hall of Fame, had fewer top 20 hits than the Monkees. They sold more records in 1967 alone than both the Rolling Stones and the Beatles together. Other artists were also incensed at their absence. In the past, Refer. M.S. Michael Stipe stated that he wanted the Monkees to be admitted before his band was. In 2007, Refn finally made it in any way. However, the Monkees continued to prove themselves in spite of the contempt. They seized their music, battled for creative control, and produced albums that were finally praised by reviewers. Some are even excellent. There is more to their legacy than just memorable melodies. The Monkees revolutionized the relationship between television and music. They didn't merely star in a sitcom when their program debuted in 1966. Instead, they invented something entirely new. Comedy skits, quick cuts, and bizarre gags are intercut with musical performances. No one had ever witnessed anything like it, and it was wild and new. They essentially created the music video decades before MTV did. The evidence is everywhere. 2 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Comedy, were won by their television program. One of the Monkees, Michael Nesmith, went on to produce Pop Clips, a short-form music video program that served as a direct inspiration for MTV. Elephant Parts was also released by his firm, a crazy compilation of skits and videos that won the first ever Grammy for Best Video Album.